All right, welcome everybody. My name's Dave. If you need to contact me, you can always ping me on Twitter like that. I'm also dsyer@pivotal.io. So I work for Pivotal, and I'm on the Spring engineering team, which means I write the Spring software, basically. I don't know, does anybody need me to explain more about what I do? I'm on the engineering team. Anybody got any questions already? None. It's probably okay. I find it very difficult to explain what I do, actually. I don't know why. It's not her fault, but my wife has never understood it. I don't know if she ever will. I do try to explain sometimes, and she tries hard to understand, but I can't explain it to her for whatever reason. Okay, so we're here to talk about some Spring security related stuff, and I'm going to use AngularJS as a sort of vehicle to talk about Spring security, really, because if you know anything about my work, I'm not really an expert on JavaScript or AngularJS, but I have dabbled in it. That's more of a hobby, I would say. But I'm interested in the Spring security side of things, and I have done some work in that area on the Spring framework in a couple of areas. I also used to be on the Cloud Foundry team, and so I was sort of partly responsible for the identity management system that's built into Cloud Foundry. So that's kind of where my interest comes from. You might have seen that I wrote a few blogs last year on this topic. Anybody read the blogs? Few hands. Okay, so it turned out that was quite a popular set of articles, and so we turned it into a sort of living, breathing tutorial guide, and that's where this work comes from, basically. So I spend, a lot of time answering people's questions on Stack Overflow and GitHub and Gitter and places like that. And what I was noticing was that a lot of people were asking the same question about this, basically. How do you set Spring security up in the back end in the sort of best way to talk to JavaScript front end? And I suppose it didn't need to be JavaScript. It could be other kinds of front end, but I'm going to concentrate on the Angular bit. I've got some slides. There's going to be quite a lot of, hopefully, successful demo coding as well. I'm not going to try and cover everything in the blogs in any detail, but you can also obviously always ask me about that. Given the size of the room, it's going to be difficult to have a lot of chat during the session, unfortunately. So, I mean, don't feel like you have to save your questions. If you raise your hand because I skipped something, that I'll happy to go back and explain it. But we'll have some time for questions at the end, I hope, as well. So I'll give you a quick introduction to the building blocks, the things that we are going to throw into the pot here to build some software. So Spring security, Spring session. Spring Cloud also figures somewhat prominently in the blog articles, but I won't have time to talk about that today, probably. AngularJS, which I'm using as kind of a proxy for all JavaScript front ends. They all roughly speak the same kind of language, so you can do the same kind of tricks with them. I've just used Angular as a consistent way to implement everything. The main thing is really what are the tricks? What are the tricks you can play to help these things talk to each other? Because they both understand security in some way. And so what can we do in the back end to make the front end happy and vice versa? Here are some links that you might find helpful. I'll put these up at the end as well. So the first one is what the blogs turned into. So there were blogs, they were turned into tutorials. That's this one. I'll show you that quickly, I suppose. There we go. So there's quite a lot of content there. I'm not going to be able to talk about all of it in detail today, I should think. But that's there. if there's anything that you didn't get, then that's there to help you to reorientate yourself, basically. So I'm going to do this a different way for this one. This guide is more recent. So the way we structured the guides in Spring.io is sort of grouping them together by content type. And so this is a tutorial, the top one. The middle one is called a topical guide. And a topical guide is, it's sort of a bit of a moving target, but it's a sort of shorter format than a tutorial. So it's a set of topics that are useful to sort of bookmark. You might keep going back to it, but it's going to be more detailed and more opinionated than a reference guide or a user guide. It's not specifically about how to do anything. It's more about, what is it? What are the concepts? How do they relate to each other? That kind of thing. So I wrote one on Spring Security, the architecture of Spring Security. So that, if I skip over things that are details of Spring Security, you may be able to anchor yourself by going to this guide and having a look. That's a useful one to know about. And of course, this place is a useful thing to know about. I'm sure you've all seen this. This is start.spring.io, which is Josh Long's favorite place on the internet. And so I'm going to be doing this inside the IDE, but I could build myself a nice web application with security by doing that and generating it. Okay, so I'll do that for you behind the scenes in the application, in the IDE in a minute. So those are some links. If you get lost while I'm talking, you could maybe go and finish reading up there. So Spring Security is, at least for its current manifestation in web applications, it's very heavily focused and biased towards the servlet API. So filter is part of the servlet spec. Filters are generic, so they're not. You don't have to be using Spring behind Spring Security. Spring Security can be used to protect any servlet-based application, and that's quite useful to know sometimes. So it concerns itself with identity, authentication, and also access decisions. Is this person allowed or not allowed to carry out the action or visit the resource or access the resource that they're asking for? There is also some nice support for OAuth 2, which is very popular these days. I've given talks at SpringOne before about this topic. I'm not going to get into that today in much detail unless anybody asks me to. Lots of other features. Okay, so Spring Security is the backend framework that I'm going to be using to protect a Spring application in this case. AngularJS is, like I said at the beginning, it's sort of a model for all JavaScript frameworks. For me, it's just the one that I chose to implement this guide. The nice thing about Angular, I think, for a Spring developer is that it has a sort of a fairly sophisticated notion of what dependencies are, and dependency injection feels kind of familiar to a Spring developer. And I think maybe for that reason, AngularJS has good traction in the enterprise generally. But there's nothing really about these samples or the presentation that I'm giving that is about Angular, except where I explicitly write code in the client. So the similar features exist in all of the frameworks. How do I make this go away? That's a good question, isn't it? Go to slide 6. There we go. All right, I think this is an important slide. Okay, so if you're going to go to sleep, do it in 5 minutes. Part of the philosophy, part of the thesis of this tutorial and this presentation is that you have a modern browser. They're fairly ubiquitous these days. Everybody has one. Most people have one that's modern enough to meet these basic requirements. There are plenty of security features built into the browser. That's what I'm saying. So HTTP basic, it's a common denominator. I'm going to use it quite heavily in the demos just now. Cookies, very important. more complicated things are also there, right? Kerberos, common origin, resource sharing, cores, HSTS for ensuring that you always use SSL or TLS. And there's a sort of newish thing called content security policy as well. All of these are built into the browser, all right? So you'd be stupid not to use them, right? That's the point. And you can also substitute, I think, I'm not a front-end developer, like I said, but they tell me that the REST clients, the web clients in the mobile devices are very browser-like. They have the same features. So, please use them. They're reliable. They're provided by the vendor. You don't have to worry about them. Don't try and roll any of this yourself. People do. That's why I'm saying it. People do. I probably will get to the point where I use Spring Session today, just to show you how that works and what you can do with it. I don't know how old it is now, maybe a year, maybe a bit more than a year. It's not tied to Spring Security, but it works well with it. So it's also servlet filtered driven and makes it very easy, basically, to share session data across application instances. Primarily, that's what it's for, but I'll show you some tricks where you share sessions amongst applications as well. There are several backends now actually supported out of the box. So I'll be using Redis. I think there's one for Hazelcast, JDBC, probably Gemfire. So there are different backends now for Spring Session. I'll also mention Spring Cloud briefly. I'm not going to use the features in the demos today, but I did in some of the sample apps in the tutorial. The most relevant pattern is API Gateway, where basically you get a reverse proxy sort of as part of your application, and use that to tunnel all of the requests from the client into various backends. It gives you a nice abstraction layer, basically. So I've been responsible for quite a lot of the Spring Cloud code. If you want to ask me questions about it, please do. Okay, so a basic web application would look a bit like this. I would have a browser with all those good security features, and then I would have, all in the same back-end application, I've got a UI, HTML and JavaScript is what I'm proposing for this, and also some kind of HTTP resource, so something I can grab JSON from the back end and render it. That's what Angular does very well. Okay, so let's just set that up, get one of those working as quickly as we can. So I'm going to go in my IDE, I'm going to create a new project, and this is a wizard which is based on the web service that I showed you earlier. So I'll make a simple Spring Boot project with web and actuator, because I like that. And I'm not going to secure it yet, so that's all I need at the minute. Okay, so here we go. Here's my application. Can you see that at the back? Somebody raised their hand. Was that a thumb? Yeah, good, thank you. Okay, great. So I actually don't need to do anything there quite yet. What I'm going to do is create a new index.html. And I'm going to use a little shortcut here to set up some HTML. Okay, so that's just a page with some words on it, nothing very much at the minute. I can actually run that now already, right? I can do run as Spring Boot application. I could just run the main method, but if I run as Spring Boot application, I get the colors. I like colors. And then I guess I need another browser window. Let's do it this way. So localhost 8080 is now showing me some HTML, right? If I look in DevTools, sorry, I just did F12 there. You couldn't see me do it. there's some redness. All right, what's happening here? It's not finding some style sheets and some JavaScript libraries that I asked it for. Okay, so why is that happening? Well, here you see style sheets and JavaScript, and I've got, whoops, you can see that, right? /webjars, bootstrap, CSS. So what I want is some Twitter library that I want to pull into my application, and I'm going to use WebJars to do it. I didn't do this in the tutorial, but I find it very convenient. I'm a weakling when it comes to front-end development, so I like everything to be nice and inside my build, my Maven build. Okay, so inside my POM, I'm going to add some WebJars. Okay, and I did that with a shortcut, but there wasn't very much. There was Bootstrap, jQuery, and AngularJS. Okay, and in addition, I've got this thing called WebJars Locator, which is really cool. And what that does, let me just restart that app. What that does is it lets me use that form of resource path with no versions or anything. So it's just going to pick the only Bootstrap which is on the class path is going to be loaded up by this app. So that's a Spring 4.2 feature, I think, and then in Spring Boot 1.3, we added some auto configuration for it. So all you have to do is add it to the class path. All right, so now I've got nice Twitter fonts, okay, and everybody's green on the right-hand side. But I don't have any proper content yet. So let's do that. Well, actually, let's just get Angular first. I've got another shortcut for that. So I'm going to do everything in one page because then you can see it all. Obviously, if I was doing a real application, I might be more modular. I'm going to make an Angular controller called home. All right, and I'm going to put some code in there. So I'm going to do var self equals this. And then I'm going to do, actually you want this to depend on $HTTP. So this is dependency injection, Angular style. So that's saying I want me an HTTP service. Please give me the ability to get /greeting from my application. And if it's successful, then do something with the response. So this will be the HTTP response, and I'm going to say self.greeting equals response.data. So the response comes in with a body, and I'm going to assign that to a local variable inside this controller, which is called home. Okay, and then to refer to that inside my view, I'm going to go up here and make this into an Angular app. I'm going to be lazy and put everything in the same controller just for the demo, okay, but probably you would modularize this if you were doing it at home, as it were. So home is the name of the controller, and then I want to refer to it as home inside my HTML. So I'm going to do that as well. Here's some data. So I'm going to have a message, which is coming from that greeting. So home.greeting.message is like that. And then I'm going to do each message comes with an ID as well. Okay, so that's my data model. Very simple, just to get something working for a demo. Let's just load that and see if it barfs at me. Okay, that's good. The only thing I've got now is a red thing saying there's no greeting because it's a 404. It's a little bit small on the font. Can you see that one? Yes? Okay, it's a 404. You can tell it's red, right? Because I haven't implemented it yet. Okay, that's easy. I know how to do that. At REST controller. Pause. while somebody finds auto-completion. There we go. And then I'm going to make a request mapping /greeting, public greeting, oops, return new greeting, hello, Vegas. All right, I don't have a greeting yet, but I can make one really quickly. I have a shortcut for that as well. It's a very simple POJO. It has an ID, and it has a message. That's what I need in my front end, right? That should be enough. So let me run that. Reload, and there we go. And if I reload again, that's the reason I have an ID, so I can change it. Okay, so that's working. It's a nice, simple Angular model app that I can use to explain some of these security concepts. Okay, where are my slides? Here we go. So I showed you this single-page application. It has content that's being bound to some model in the Angular application. It has the Angular application itself, which I've just put in line inside the HTML in the demo. And then I did this HTTP GET to pull the data from the backend. Okay, so now we're going to secure it. How are we going to secure it? We're going to add Spring Boot starter security to the class path. So that will bring in Spring Security and some other stuff. I can use a shortcut for that. If you're using this IDE, you can edit starters and bring it back up that wizard. So I can just add security that way. Okay. Need to restart because I changed the class path. One thing I noticed there is it flew past when the log started up there. Here we go. I'm using a default security password. So to make things easier later, I'm going to change that now. Security.user.password. So this is just the default single account that you get from Spring Boot by default if you do nothing else. So it's useful to have it just to get things started and to do the demo. I'm not going to change that in this presentation. So I just want to have a password I can remember. Okay, obviously you don't do it this way if you're running in production. You might do it with an environment variable. That would be fine, just to make something secure. Okay, so what's happened now? If I go back to my incognito window, try and reload that, it's secure, right? It wants me to authenticate. I could just log in here because I'm using basic authentication. That's the default with Spring Boot. But I don't want that because I don't like the user experience of this pop-up. Okay, so that's a common thing that people don't like. Okay, if I cancel that, I get the error page, which is fine. What I need is, okay, where are my slides? What I need is to add some security configuration, right? So I need a web security configurator adapter, which authorizes requests. And I want to make sure that my home page, my index.html, isn't protected because I need that to actually have a dialogue with the user. So I'm just going to copy this code into the application. Everybody's happy. Now I actually don't have a home or a login page, so I'll just delete those for now. They're not doing anything. Restart that. When I restart, I've got my password, and then I load the home page. Oh, that's odd, isn't it? So what happened? Okay, I've got the HTML is loading. That's the home page. And then I've got this, again, this stupid little dialog. Why? Because the greeting resource is now protected. That's good, right? I just secured my backend resource. But I don't want that dialog. Okay, so we need to get rid of that dialog. There is a trick for doing that, and this is why we're here. So it turns out Spring Security out of the box will not throw that dialog or not send the header which causes that dialog to happen. So if you're interested, that's what it is. The browser sees a www -authenticate basic header coming back in the response, pops up a dialog. I can stop it doing that with this little trick. This is Angular specific, but it's the same for any client. If you send a header called x -requested with XML HTTP request, then Spring Security knows that you're a web client, and he's going to back off. So let me put this here in my Angular app. So that's just a little piece of Angular mumbo jumbo for default headers. So every request is now going to go from my client, is going to go through this HTTP. It will have the extra header. So if I just go back to my app, reload. Good. Okay, so no more dialog. It's still red, right, because it's still protected, but I'm not seeing any pop-ups. Okay, so it's not, the user experience is much better. Obviously, I could add error handling and show them something else if there was an error, but really what I want to show you is how to make the user experience for logging in. So I'm going to do that next in my slides, probably. So what I want to have is a login form, right, where the user can type in the username and password. And then on the in the Angular app, I'm going to have a login function like this. I'll just copy this into the code, and then we can look at it. So let's, actually it's probably easier to read here. This is a trick that I find quite useful. I often see the same thing happening, right? Facebook does it, Google does it, everybody does it. You have an endpoint on your app that says who the user is if he's authenticated. So I've used that trick a lot. In this case, I'm not going to bother with the user endpoint, but you could easily add one. Okay, I'm just going to use the greeting endpoint as a proxy for that, because all I want to do is find that I've been authenticated successfully. So what that does is it sends to this greeting endpoint, it sends a GET request, but it adds basic authentication. Okay, so this is the standard format for basic authentication with a base 64 encoded credentials. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, whatsoever. So inside that, I'm setting up the greeting now, and actually I'm going to do this, self.hide equals false, because in my login form, which I'm now going to construct, okay, so here's how I do a login form. Let me just make that a bit bigger. First, I'm going to make some tabs. I've got a shortcut for that as well somewhere with the bootstrap styling. And then I'm going to put some ng-click. This is how you do event handlers in Angular. Home.refresh. I'm going to put that on the home menu. And I'm going to have a logout button eventually. I'm not going to implement that just yet, but I'll put that in there as a placeholder. And to save some time in the demo, I'm just going to put the login form here in line, okay? If you look at the sample apps in the tutorial, in that I take an Angular partial rendering view thing and make a different route. So I have a login route and a home route, and I do things slightly differently. For the purposes of this demo, I'll just put the form there, and I'll hide it if there's a flag set. Okay. So the flag will be, by default, will be unset, which means that I should see that. And then I'm going to do the opposite on the container with the content. So I'm going to do ng-show home.hide. Who thinks that's going to work? Looks okay, doesn't it? What's missing? Don't know, let's see. Did I type that right? Password. Oh, you know what? It did work, but I skipped something down here. That bit's wrong, isn't it? Self.hide equals true. That's what I really meant. Oh, sorry, I have to reload now, don't I? Okay, user password. Cool, okay. There's my message. I didn't implement the refresh button yet, so let me do that quickly. I've sort of got it here, haven't I? Self.refresh equals function that thing. Okay, so that was the thing that I originally initialized the page with, and now I'm going to put it on a button. And maybe I would just add that as well as an initializer, refresh. Actually, you don't need to do that, do I? It's pointless. User password. Okay, cool. And then when I click home, I get a refresh, and it goes to the back end and gets some more resources. Okay, so what's missing? We're going to do logout next. Okay, I haven't implemented that, so when I click on that, nothing happens. Quick recap there. That was the login function. In the samples in the tutorial, it's a bit more modular. I've got 2 controllers, I've got roots. It's a bit more sort of tidy, which you can easily do, right? I'm just showing you the features in Spring Security, basically. So that's the summary of what we've got there. We've got HTTP basic to send the original request to authenticate. And if that's successful, then basically what you see after that is every other request is going to have a cookie in it. Let's make sure we understand that. All right, so every time I click home, I get a new backend request. The greeting resource is secured here with a cookie. Okay, there's no basic auth on that request, it's a cookie. Use the cookies. All right, it's a browser feature. They're nice and secure and well behaved and predictable. Everybody understands them. The cookie is good. Okay, so to get the logout working, I'm going to have to understand cross-site request forgery. And why is that? Because CSRF is an issue, right? You can't, if you don't want to have your web application attacked using this kind of attack, it's easy. All the frameworks support something, including Spring Security and including Angular, but they just do it slightly differently. Okay, so that's the reason I'm talking about it. So to protect against CSRF, basically what you need is a token that's unique to the session, which you include in a header, ideally. Spring Security has strategies for that, but by default, it looks in a request header for a header called x minus CSRF minus token, like that. And what people usually do with Spring Security, if they're not doing single page applications, if they're doing rendering on the server side, which I'm not in this one, what they do is they use a request attribute and they render a request attribute which has that token value, and then you can include that in your response. Angular does it slightly differently. So Angular expects you to send it a cookie called XSRF token, and then having got that cookie, you take the cookie value and you send it back as a request header. Well, this is what Angular does by default. So I'm going to take the approach that Angular has made a perfectly valid choice, and I want to match that in the Spring backend. Actually, maybe we should just look at what happens if we do it wrong first. So back in the controller, I'm going to do wrong place. Self.logout equals function $HTTP post. Okay, that's why I need CSRF, because I'm sending mutating requests, /logout, and then if it's successful, I could do any number of things, but the main thing is that I want to, in this case, self.hide equals false, so I get my login form back. And maybe I could also just reset the greeting. It doesn't really matter because I'm not going to be able to see it. If it's successful. If it's not, then I don't care, something went wrong. I could fix that, right? I could have error handling as well, but for the purposes of the demo, I don't care at the minute. Okay, so let me just reload that. Relog in. Same as before, right? But now when I log out, oops. All right, it's red. Here's the red thing. If you can't see the response code, it's a 403. It's red, and if I look at the response, it says, could not verify the provided CSRF token. Okay, that's Spring Security telling me that I sent it something invalid. I said I wanted to change something. I didn't provide the correct credentials, so all it can do is send me a 403. Okay, so thankfully that is easy to fix. So I go into my HTTP security configuration here, and I do .csrf CSRF token repository, and there's a special one called cookie CSRF token repository, which has a convenience method. All right. This is a new feature in Spring Security 4.1, if anybody hadn't seen that before. It's kind of neat. And what this does, it has various different ways of handling cookie storage for the CSRF token, but the default is one that works with Angular and other front-end applications frameworks. So I need to restart for that to work. Okay, that's working. And if I log in again, password, here's my data, log out. Still red. Okay, why? Because the default, it's successfully logged out actually now. So my session in Spring Security is gone, but it's redirected me to a non-existent endpoint. So that's the default of Spring Security saying, oh, you've logged out, you must want to log in again. And that's just something I need to change here in the server. So I can do and logout success URL. I'll just send myself back to the home page if I'm successfully logged out. Okay, that should work. Something's not compiling. Oh, two ands. No. Oh, dot and? No, what's your problem? It's a problem with having too much stuff. Oh, I see, right, it's just all on the wrong line. There we go. There we go, as long as I can compile it. Start again. User, password. There's my message. And now when I log out, it works. Okay, so I had a successful post to log out. It sent me a 302 to the home page. Brilliant. So that was CSRF and also the logout handler. The cookie repository, I showed you that. Didn't need to copy paste it. And the logout success URL, which I only need to do because I'm doing this single page, static resource thing. You could redirect to something else. The main thing is that I have to send a post request. And I have to get back a valid response. Okay, so that's a nice self-contained UI with login, nice user experience. One last thing I might have time to show you before we have to scoot to the end is what would I need to do to break the API resource out into a separate application. So one way I could do that is like this. I could have a browser contacting the UI like I just did with HTTP basic. And then I could do the same thing with the resource server. I could, manage the user database in the same way. I could have the same configuration for the UI and the resource. I would have to deal with common origin concerns because the browser got the UI resources from the front-end server, and the back-end is a different address. So I'd have to deal with that. There are ways to do that. This is also a nice new feature in Spring Security 4.1, which is this. In my HTTP configuration, I can just say, cause, make it so, and it does. And the way that works is it integrates with Spring MVC. So in Spring MVC, there is a common origin declaration on the controller, and then that basically feeds into the same configuration for Spring Security. There is also this thing, if you're interested. You can manually match CORS pre-flight requests in a request matcher inside the same configuration here, but it's pretty easy just to do that if you're using Spring MVC. If you're not using Spring MVC, then you would probably need to use this or something like it. So then what I did in the samples in the tutorial was I broke out Spring Session. Okay, so using Spring Session to store HTTP sessions, you can use that to scale out your apps individually. But you can also play this trick, which is what I did in the tutorial. So if I point both apps at the same database, and then the UI will send back a cookie to an authenticated user. The cookie can then be introspected inside the browser and then turned into a token for a request to the resource server. And then there's a little bit of machinery you need to set up on the resource server. It was fiddly, but it's, you do it once and you get it right, and that's fine. I'm not going to show that. I'm going to show a slightly different pattern, which is this one, where you hide the resource server behind the gateway. And then you don't have to worry about common origin, which is nice. And you also don't need to do all that translation from cookie to token in the browser and interpreting it in the resource. Now, in the sample, in the tutorial, I did this gateway using Spring Cloud. You can go and look at that if you want. What I'm proposing to do for this is something a little bit more quick and dirty so you can see how it works. So I'm just going to copy this app that I've got. Actually, I won't copy it yet. What I'll do first is I'll add some dependencies. So I'm going to add Spring Session and Redis. I don't have to do anything else. Just adding the dependencies means that if there's a Redis server there, actually there has to be a Redis server there. There is one. I'm running it in the background here, somewhere there. There's Redis. Actually, I could do this as well. I've got a Redis client here. If I flash all, so it's empty. Redis is empty. All right. Then I'm going to copy that into a new backend resource. This is going to be very simple, so I'm going to strip out most of the code that's in there. Call it resource application so I don't get confused. Yes, I want to do all that. I don't need any static resources anymore. I don't think I want that anymore. I'll just take the default. I do need a server.port. Oops. So that they don't clash. So let's put it on port 9000. And then inside the application, I'm going to take the default security configuration. I don't need all of that. I'm going to put this on the home page. Hello, backend, so you know that it's the backend. And I don't need the greeting anymore. Actually, I do need the greeting. I'll delete it from the front end. All right, so there's a nice standalone resource server. And on the front end, I will make the opposite change. So don't need the greeting. I'll need a different greeting for that. It's going to be a proxy, basically. But I don't need this guy, because that would tie me to the data model for the backend. I'm just going to be really generic and say I'm going to have a map from string to object. And here I'm going to cheat a little bit as well. So map string object dot get body. See what I did there? Okay, I had saved that, but it's really just a REST template to exchange the data to the backend. I'm building a proxy with a hard-coded URL, but of course I can extract that into configuration or something later. That's the power of this proxy approach. I can, configure it and control it myself here quite easily. I need a REST template. So I'm going to build a REST template. New REST template. And, okay, so to get the authentication right, I'm going to need the cookie, right? I want to send the cookie to the back end. Where can I get the cookie? I can get the cookie from session. So I'll just auto-wire him. I might be a bit more modular about that as well if I was doing this for real. And then I can just do REST template dot get interceptors dot add. And an interceptor is it has a request, it has a body, and it has a context to propagate. So then I can return context dot execute request body. Okay, so that's a do nothing interceptor, and the actual feature that I want is request dot get headers dot add cookie. I need to add a cookie to the back end. The default name for the cookie in Spring Session is session. That's just something I know, but I can change that if I want to. Okay, so you see what I'm doing? I'm adding a header with the session value in a cookie, and that's going to go in this call here to the backend resource. So the browser is going to call the gateway is a proxy, it's going to call to the backend, but it's going to add authentication. Wish me luck. There's definitely one more thing I need to do here, two more things I need to do. One is security.session. I need to make sure that there are sessions on the back end because there won't be by default. Security.sessions equals never. Never is kind of weird, but that's what it is actually what I want. Spring Security will never create an HTTP session, but will use it if it already exists. That's what I want, right? Because I want the session to be created by the front end. And then in the front end, there's a Spring Session thing that I need to do. Spring Session Redis flush mode equals immediate. So I want Redis to know about it as soon as I authenticate. That's a new feature as well. From the time that I first wrote the blog, it's not that new anymore. It's probably 6 months old, but that's useful. So let me just restart those servers. Simple app and resource. I'll do that here. Okay, I'm going to be super cautious here and start with a new browser window. But I'll show you the dev tools. So AT80, AT80. There's my login screen. Fingers crossed. Submit. It works. Okay, so that's a backend call channel through the UI, which is now acting as a proxy. And when I log out, it has the same feature as before. So like I said, in the tutorial, what I did was I made the gateway out of Spring Cloud. So there's a feature of Spring Cloud called Zool Proxy, so I can declaratively make those applications quite quickly. I could actually show you that by importing it here. Dev guides. So it was the proxy sample. It's basically the same feature set, but in this UI, I have @enable Zool proxy, and then I don't need to implement the greeting endpoint here because the greeting endpoint is a Zool root. Okay, so /resource gets mapped to a physical URL. So I've done it kind of more, slightly more declaratively, but it's the same feature set that I just built you live, as it were. Okay, so there's that. Then another thing that we did in the samples in the tutorial was we externalized the authentication completely, and that's often called single sign-on because you have the ability then to authenticate the user with multiple different applications using the same authorization server or authentication server, whatever you want to call that. And so the sort of security architecture for this ends up being you log into the auth server, you get a cookie for that, and that gives you permission via a cookie also and a token to access the UI. But cookie is what the browser sends. Right, the token actually lives inside the application. It never leaks out. The browser doesn't need to know the token. The browser has a cookie. Remember what I said at the beginning, the browser has some nice security features. You don't need to mess around with tokens in the browsers. They speak cookies. And the cookies are secure by design, right, by implementation. Another thing that I did at the sort of culmination of the blog series anyway was to start pushing UI resources down below the gateway as well. So I did this. You could imagine doing it with a single gateway and then the UI and resource server together and sharing session data using Redis, for instance, or using an auth server, right? I could have an external auth server. So actually that's a good contrast, right? The difference between using an auth server and not is that I don't need to use Spring Session in this one. I still can if I want to, but I don't need to. And that's actually why I slightly prefer it. I slightly prefer having an external authorization provider like that. So then I pushed the UI below the gateway. I split the UI up into UI and resource. And then I got really clever and added another UI. So there was an admin feature and a user feature on both sides of the gateway there. And they had different access rules. So to access the admin side, you needed a different set of roles and access and permissions than to access the UI. So here's a quick overview of all of the parts of that tutorial and the blog series. There was a basic sample where everything was in the same backend, which then turned into single, which adds the form authentication. So you saw me do that basically today on the stage with a session cookie. Then I broke it up into resource server and UI, two separate servers, and I glued them together with Spring Session. There was actually an intermediate step there as well in the tutorials. There's another sample app there in there which doesn't have a secure backend. So the resource server was insecure in the intermediate step. Then I introduced the proxy, which I think is a nice pattern. I showed you how to do it sort of manually today on the stage, but you can do it declaratively with Spring Cloud and Zool, and that's a nice feature. And then I think the sort of tour de force, if you like, is externalizing the authentication into an authorization server in the samples, I did that as a standalone, self-grown authorization server, but I could use there basically anything that speaks OAuth 2. I could use GitHub, for instance, and that's what we do in Spring.io. When I write a blog on Spring.io, I have to log in using GitHub. And then the last thing was the double, where I had admin and user UIs hidden behind the gateway, but the same pattern, the same gateway pattern. There you go. There's a list of things to go away and read, and I think I used up my time. I'll just read these out so you know what they are. That's the slides that you're looking at today. They'll be on my website, prezosdsyer.com. They'll also be on YouTube and everything as well, of course. Speaker deck, probably. That's the tutorial, Spring Security and Angular. A good thing to do is to go to spring.io/guides and just type search terms in there, and if you type security, you'll find all of these things. That's the topical guide on architecture, if you might find that useful. This is the source code for the guide, so it has all of the ASCII doctor documentation plus all of the Java code. The OAuth 2 code that I used in the auth server that I didn't demo today lives in a separate project, which I used to be the lead of. I guess I still am. Rob, and if anybody's interested, I'll tell you what the plans are for that. But Rob and Joe are taking that over, basically. And then there's some Spring Cloud stuff, basically for @enable Zool proxy, so that I could create a proxy declaratively. And there's my coordinates if you want to say something nice to me. Say something nice on Twitter. And that's it, yeah. So that's the top of the hour, which is actually all I was supposed to do. Why don't I ask for a couple of questions? If it works, we can continue. Otherwise, we'll just break up and I'll come and answer questions at the front. Anybody got one? Right. So you're asking for advice basically on what to do with headers and proxies in general, but specifically to do with sensitive headers. So there's this feature that he's noticed. Sorry, what's your name? Jeremy. That Jeremy noticed in the Zool proxy, where we added it in Spring Cloud 1.1 in Netflix 1.1. In general, some headers are likely to contain sensitive information, and you might not want them to go to the back end. Like, for instance, if the cookie, so if the back end was an external system or something, I don't want to send it my cookie. So what we did was we blacklisted 3 or 4 headers, authorization, cookie, something else, can't remember, so that they, by default, are not sent to the back end, and you have to explicitly ask for them. You have to relist them, re-whitelist them, if you like. So I think, the general advice is, if it's within your own system, if it's logically the same system, you shouldn't care about it. But if you're going to be sending a cookie from Facebook to GitHub, then I would probably worry about that, because they probably won't be very happy with you, right? So really it's a question of what the logical boundaries are in your system, and you can analyze that yourself, but by default we'll just switch them off for you. That's a gotcha for everybody, I think, because we changed the behavior in Spring Cloud 1.1. It was in Brixton. It was a jar, but I think it was the right thing to do. Anybody else want to ask a question? And then we'll wrap up. Great, thanks. So yeah, go on. So the question was, is the Zool proxy from the example extended to use OAuth anywhere? Yes, I think that's the way that I did it with the basic. There are 2 OAuth samples, and they both use Zool proxy. I think there was in the double sample, I took out the auth server because it was just one more moving part. I wanted to keep it simple. If you wanted to put it back in, it wouldn't be very difficult. that's the comment I think I made in the tutorial anyway. Okay, we're going to wrap up now. If you want to come and ask more questions, that's fine. I'll be around for a while. Thanks, everyone.